All right. Happy Friday. Happy Friday. It is another great day for black belts and boardrooms. Man, Amir, this week has been a great week. It has been a blessing this week. Who do we have on the podcast today?
Well, Renard, I am so thrilled today to introduce our audience to William Washington. He's a global CFO for a very big international law firm. And I know, at least for myself, I am keen on learning a thing or two about leadership from William. And, as you can probably see from the way he's dressed, I'll just make a very quick comment. Looking very sharp, sir. Very sharp indeed.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah. So, William, thank you for making time for us today. And, just usually what I like to do is, let everybody explain their journey, their life story. So, if you will, what is that origin story we should know about you? You can go as deep as you like, you can go as shallow as you like. I'll leave it up to you.
The origin story, well, let me see. It started in the, like, look, we all have different stories, and I love telling my story. And first of all, let me stop and say thank you both for what you're doing, what you're bringing to the world through your podcast. I think you guys are doing an amazing work, and I can't wait to see how this turns out. But I continue to listen to your other podcasts, and thank you for having me as a guest. I'm pleased to be here. One of the things I get most thankful for in telling my origin story is I try to find a way to relate to anybody who may be listening to the podcast. So I tell people my story isn't something that I read in a book. It's not something that I saw on a TV show. I didn't hear it on a radio. I lived it. It's a part of me. It's who I am. And the reason I say that is because there's a lot that's weaved into my origin story, as you call it, that makes me who I am as a leader today. And my story as being today as the global CFO of a large international law firm that does almost $4 billion a year in revenue. I have a job that has me on the road almost 50% of the time, traveling to 40 something different countries around the world, and dealing with a finance team that has over 1,400 professionals in it. I couldn't have seen this journey, when I was starting off in my original, what I would say were humble beginnings. And I believe we all have some humble beginnings to some degree. But when I tell my story, I try to look in the audience and I say, if you look back to my early beginnings, my mother was a single parent. She had my older sister when she was in high school. She had me shortly thereafter. She did the best she could. She was working really hard. Life wasn't easy for us growing up. We had the typical home that a single parent would have, full of cockroaches and and not enough food and neighborhood not the best. And all of that just led me on a path, what I saw, just going in one direction, which was downhill. Early on, my sister started running away early in her life. I followed right behind. She dropped out of high school. I dropped out of high school. Somehow I navigated my way back, and got into college and then dropped out of there too. And at one point, when I was in my late teens, early 20s, the only thing I thought was I was either going to keep working at the drugstore I was working at the shoe store I was working at, or I was going to become a truck driver because the truck drivers would drop supplies off at both of those stores. And that looked like a dream job to me. Like, oh my gosh, I could drive this big truck and go around what I thought was the world, or the world as I knew it at that time. And in addition to that, there were just a lot of other dark things happening. I ended up becoming a single parent. My sister ended up being murdered. My brother ended up committing suicide. And all of this was before I was, in my mid 20s. And so, I was one of the fortunate ones. I was fortunate enough to receive, a phone call one day to change my life. It got me back on a path to college. When I went to college, I studied finance because finance was talking about money, and I didn't know anything about money. I surely didn't have any money, and I had never really known anybody with any money. And I think through that college career path and taking it serious that second time around, it just put my life on a different trajectory. And I could talk about a lot of ups and downs that even happened after that. But I tell people simply this: Even during my darkest times, I was always hungry for more. I always wanted more out of life. I wanted more for myself. I absolutely wanted more for my children once I had children, and I could see that life had something else that other people were taking advantage of. I just didn't know how to get from where I was today to where they were. Matter of fact, I didn't even know if there was a path, and so I think when the opportunity came for me, I just grabbed it with both hands and just ran full steam ahead. And you know, that that's the short version of my origin story. There's a lot more meat in that overall life journey.
Yeah. William, I'm in awe right now, and I'll tell you why. One of the things, and Renard, I'm gonna use your name, but you tell me if you disagree with me, but one of the things we do with this show is how do we show the shape of leadership in so many different ways that doesn't include the word celebrity in it? And I know we as a culture latch onto the word celebrity, but to me, you're somebody who comes across as a strong leader, great work ethic, fabulous values that you bring not only to yourself but to your colleagues at the workplace. And the resiliency that you just now shared in your origin story is just incredible, and that is the reason why I'm in awe. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. But on that note, I'm curious now to ask, how do you then convey this to your teammates, to your colleagues? You have a large firm, large staff. I'm sure there's somebody there that's hungry for that kind of an attention and that kind of a mentorship.
Yeah, and I think, look, it's you can't go into every meeting and every relationship in work and talk about your origin story, right? That doesn't just come up in the day to day. But one way I express my leadership style to people is I make sure I understand where my people are at, right? Like I'm very cognizant that when I walk into a room of 10, 15, 20 teammates, that each of them are coming from their own individual origin stories and their own day-to-day experiences. And so I try to make space for that both in the time that we have during the meeting and also in my relationships with them, getting to know who they are, and where they're coming from and where they want to go, and taking time to share with people maybe not necessarily my journey, but how they can take their journey from where they are today to where they want to be. Because if you remember, I said one of the things for me is I I didn't even know what the steps were taken. I tell people I went to work at a mailroom in a law firm hoping to get to be a lawyer. And I say that today and it doesn't make any sense to me. Like if you want to be a lawyer, you should go to undergrad and go to law school and then you should, maybe clerk for a judge. But since no one told me that path, I just said, I think I'll get a job at this law firm. When they hired me, Renard, you can appreciate this. I used to go work in the mailroom dressed like this. Y- And people would look at me and they'd be like, why has he got all that? And I had a tie on as well. Why does he have all that stuff on? Hey, I'm in a professional atmosphere. I want to be noticed. I want my work to be noticed. And I thought the best way to do that was to suit up and boot up. And that's how I would go to work every day.
That's
Man,
amazing.
man, you hit on some key points, especially suit up and boot up. I love that. I love that. That reminds me of not only having that presence or swagger that I like to call it, what you wear matters as well. So making sure that you're dressed right for that particular job does matter. So even though you were in the mailroom, people noticed you. People
Yeah,
noticed you.
yeah.
So you had the right attention, and it's a little crazy that I had a similar story far as me when and I tell Amir all the time when I started in tech, I didn't know I wanted to be a manager, a leader. I was like, I just need a job. I got bills, etc. That's the only thing I focus on. And over time, you start developing where your path is. So for you, now that you're the global CFO, did you picture yourself already in that position, or did it just happen over time to change different directions over time?
Well, I want to go back to what you said earlier, first of all, because I do think there are people listening who are wondering if they need to dress up or what do they need to do, and I speak a lot to people from at different levels in an organization and different generations, and there are some couple key themes that I think that show people that you're willing and that you're teachable and make them want to invest in you. And so yeah, like for me, whether it was that phone call and when I got back into school that first time, or whether it's the job I have today, I am still the first one in the office. I was the first one to class. I will get up at 5 a.m. every morning as long as I have breath life in my left in my lungs, because I want people to know that I'm showing up and ready to go to work. And I've been doing that regardless of any economic status or title or profile that I have had. And so I do think it's important how you show up for a job. You have to dress for the job you want, not the one that you currently have.
Did you know ahead of time? Was that your thought saying, "Hey, at some point I will be a global CFO at some point." Was that your thought just going on up in your career, or were you just taking it step by step?
No, I think early in my career, I fully knew, hands down, I was going to be either an NFL player or an NBA player. CFO wasn't even on my radar. Now, I barely made my high school team in football. I kind of did better than barely made it, but I barely made it. And I didn't make my high school basketball team, but I still wake up every day thinking I'm going to be an NBA player in NFL. I think I'm going to be the first 55-year-old to play his rookie year. And so, no, my dreams weren't this big starting off, at least not as it related to my professional life. What I would tell you is, um, I always wanted to have a seat at the table. From my earliest days when I was working in a convenience store, I remember they put me in a stock room. I thought I should be cashier, man. I thought I should be the manager. I was looking at those roles, and for some reason, I could always envision myself being there. And I don't know if I was seeking glory or if it just mattered to me to be in that type of role. And when I started off in finance and I had my first job as a financial analyst, I tell people I used to do spreadsheets, to do the budget or whatever analysis they would ask for. And I would give it to the VP of finance, and they would go into a room and have meetings about it. And I remember sitting outside the room wanting to be in the room and wanting to have decision making power and take the analysis and do something big with it and bold with it. So something was inside of me, absolutely, that's always driven me to the table. And even when I was in the seat next to being the CFO, I wasn't happy because even though I was still had a title and a big role, I felt like my butt wasn't on the line. And I wanted my butt to be on the line for every decision I make. And maybe everybody's not built like that, but I always start with the same question you ask me when I speak to other people. What is your dream? What did you want? And do you know how to get from where you are today to where you want to be? And do you know why you want to be there? Because, a lot of young people will come to me and say, "Oh, you're the global CFO. I want a job like that so I can travel." Now, when I hear that, I understand it because you're young and you think travel's all glorious and whatever. But I said, you can't get a job just because you want to travel. You have to show that you're so valuable that people need to send you somewhere in order to do that thing that you do well. And so it's a little different way of thinking about things. But if someone really wants to travel and they view that as part of their future, I try to walk them back into what would make them valuable enough that somebody would send you halfway around the world, usually on some type of business class ticket, put you up in a hotel, and trust that you're going to get the job done as a representative of that. That's a big responsibility.
Man, yeah, that's very important, and I like that you say you're trying to find out what makes them valuable. So, how are those conversations? Like you said, someone says, "Man, I just want to be global CFO," but really don't know why they want to be that. They see somebody, we all want to be Jordan, so we all wanted to be Kobe. We all wanted to be, X, Y, and Z. So how do you pull that out of them and say, hey, these are the steps that you're going to need to take in order to be valued?
Yeah, well, look, the world's not going to give you an instruction book on your particular life. But whenever I look at an audience full of students or young people, I do tell them that I won't be sitting in this seat 20 years from now. Somebody will be. The world needs that next generation of leaders. They don't need William Washington to never die and never go anywhere. And so, if the world needs the next generation of leaders, what's going to make the world select you out of the group of people who are sitting in that room with you? And there's a couple of core things that I did that helped me to be successful. Everybody may dial it up a little bit differently, but I do think there's 2 to 3 things that are important to do, and when I start to lay them out to people, I can see the ones that take notes. I can see the ones who call me a week later and say, "You said that one of the most important things you did was you continue to read and gain knowledge. Give me 3 books that you read." And then they come back 2 weeks later and say, "I read that book that you recommended. Do you have another?" There's one guy that I know, he's probably not the most talented guy in the world, and he hasn't had a lot of success in his early years. But I told him, I didn't even tell him. I think he just observed that I get up at 5 a.m. every morning. And I noticed that he started posting every morning, him getting up at 5 a.m. every morning. He doesn't even have a job right now, but he's getting up 5 a.m. every morning. I said, "Hey, Jaquise, I noticed you're getting up at 5 a.m. every morning." And he's basically like, "I'm doing what I can control. I'm doing what I can do." And for me, I look at him and I look at 5 other or 10 other people that have come to me. I say, that guy, he's going to be successful.
Yeah. I'm gonna say I'm a 4 a.m. guy.
You
I
always
get up
got to one up me, Renard. There you go.
I get up at 4, but I for me, it's, about exercising before I go to work because I figured out I didn't have time after. You get off work, sometimes you're like, I just need to spend time with family. So I said, "You know what? I'm gonna give up an hour of sleep and get up at 4." So I know there's a lot of people who wake up early, who are the first in the office, who don't know. If people don't know this, you get a lot done when no one else is in the office. I
Oh,
wish people would
absolutely.
understand that.
Absolutely.
So I definitely understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, yeah. Those are a couple key things I do. And there's a couple more that I believe have led to my success. And like I said, I won't stop doing them until I don't know when I'll ever stop doing it because I just believe that it's the things that I can control, I control. The things that are outside of my control will always happen. Life will have ups and downs. I've lived them, I've been a part of them, but there's always a new day.
So, William, was there ever a moment as your trajectory is going up in the organizations you were part of, that you ran into a situation where he says, "Okay, this is probably going to be the most challenging thing I've done." Could you share maybe a story if there was a moment like that in your career or your life?
Yeah, I remember at one point in my career, and there's been a couple or more than a couple instances like that, where, you know, I was a young leader. I had direct reports that weren't necessarily willing to follow the things that I was suggesting we do. I had a boss who hired me and seemed supportive during the interview process, but over time, that support seemed to wane, and there seemed to be a disconnect between this boss, me, and the people up under me. And I felt caught between a rock and a hard place because, again, like I tell you, everyone will look at me today and say, "Oh, he's successful. What's the secret sauce?" I'm telling them, when I was doing the things I thought were the secret sauce, it wasn't like, "Oh, put a coin in a slot machine and all the money falls out." There were times where I put the coin in and I just lost the coin, and I put another one in and lost that too. So I felt like there was a lack of support, and I couldn't figure out the formula. I went in early. I was the first one in. That wasn't seeming to impress anybody. I was doing the two or three things that they told me were most important during the interview process, and that no longer seemed important. I was asking questions about what I needed to do, and I wasn't getting clear answers that I thought something I could get up at 5 a.m. and execute on. And I remember feeling, and if I'm being honest, I feel like there was a little bit of dysfunction in somewhere in there. And I'm always careful because you never know who's listening to the podcast. But long story short, Renard, for that time period, I started getting up in the hour even earlier than I was getting up before. And I started using that hour to pray. Now, believe everyone has different religious beliefs, and so I do believe in meditation, prayer, or whatever it is that may spiritually ground you. But my wife will tell you that for like 1 month solid, maybe 2 months, I got up every morning an hour earlier and I prayed on this specific situation. And I'll never forget, it was the day where I felt the most relief. I felt like the mountain had been moved. Nothing had changed, but I felt like the mountain had been moved. And I went in to work that day feeling lighter than I'd ever felt. And on that particular day, this boss decided to resign. And and it was something that was completely unexpected. I thought like I had been delivered, and God, of my understanding, had suddenly moved this mountain, and I was like, "Yes, I'm going to get that job." And I thought my life was completely going to change and the trajectory change. And long story short, I did not get the job. This person quit. I did not get the job, but that peace was still with me, and I could tell you, Renard, Amir, the most fantastic thing happened. I learned something through that experience. They hired someone else. I kept working and doing the things that I was supposed to be doing. And 3 months later, literally 3 months later, I was promoted into that job. That there was only one position, but someone noticed what I was doing and they ended up making two positions out of one. And it was just a life-changing moment for me about the power of resilience, the power of staying true to what you believe are the right things, because you can only be who you are, but at times in your life you have to push through some of the tough times.
Yeah, I can just to acknowledge, or as we say in tech, right? Plus one, the point you just made. I'm somebody who wakes up in the morning as well, and I have a firm belief in my faith and God, and so on. So I can resonate with that. So as you look at yourself, I mean, you've got amazing resiliency. I can't overstate that enough. How do you look at an organization that has staying power? The firm you're in has staying power. It's been there for a long time. How do you, as a global CFO, as a leader in that position, think about as the landscape is changing around us with respect to the way AI is changing the nature of jobs? And I don't want to turn this into an AI technical conversation, but as you think about the people, because I sense you're a very people forward person. How do you reconcile your responsibility to the organization where it has such a rich history and to continue that history forward, and then to also help the folks in your organization be able to adjust to the changing landscape that we have all around us? Do you have a
Are,
perspective
are,
on
are we
that? Maybe some
starting another
insight?
hour of this session? Because that's an hour long conversation.
Well, maybe you
Hey,
could
look,
maybe you could piecemeal the parts that you think are the most important.
yeah, I mean, there's a lot to that question, and I think anyone listening to this podcast, whether they lead a large organization or a smaller part of the organization, they're probably facing some of the same challenges. So I'll tell you what I think of when I see it. First and foremost, um, I truly believe that there's nothing new under the sun, right? Like whether it's AI, whether it's, I mean, whether it's the geopolitical crisis, whether it's tariffs, there's nothing new under the sun. If we think we're facing any day we think we're facing challenges, we don't have to do anything but open our eyes a little bit to understand, like, you know, I'm facing AI and someone else just went through a war in their country and they made it through. when we look at and I don't want to get into political stuff, but when we look at what the president of Ukraine had to do as he stepped into his role and what he was faced with, and the giant of another country invading your country, and you still have to find a way to lead, I mean, that inspires me, and whether it's something big and serious such as that, or whether it's something small like Renard was saying earlier, Kobe Bryant trying to figure out how to win another championship. The skills you need and the work you need to do are exactly the same. So let me narrow it down to a couple things. As I look at my organization and what we're facing as we go forward, the first thing I do is I never get complacent. I never get complacent. There have been many big companies, you name it, whether it's Xerox or, Kodak or whatever, that have gone down because of complacency and been replaced by newer technologies and other things. So you have to create a sense of urgency and forward thinking in the midst of any environment. A lot of times people ask me, well, what do you do as a CFO with so many things that are unpredictable in today's market? I'm like, the market's always unpredictable. If you think you can predict it, then you should have retired 20 years ago. So you have to have a certain sense of urgency to make sure you stay ahead of the game. And with that sense of urgency, you have to make sure that you are getting your people prepared for tomorrow, not just for today. So when I was doing my Lean Six Sigma work, I used to tell people, take 20% of your day and always be innovating. So even today, I take 20% of my time. I'm currently enrolled in a 6-month class at Wharton on AI. I don't have to take another educational credit in my life if I don't want to. I have 3 degrees. I'm sufficient job. But because of the technology changing, I felt it was important as a leader for me to lead by example and to invest 20% of my time into learning AI. And then also making sure you build a strong peer network. You never have to go it alone. Remember, I told you when I didn't know how to get from A to B, it's because no one had told me how to get from A to B. But today we have tools in order to develop peer networks. And so I've set up a peer network, a mastermind group of other global CFOs that I organize, and I get together on a quarterly basis to talk about the topics of today to make sure I professionalize the profession, or better yet, professionalize myself. We can learn from each other's mistakes, and we can benefit from each other's ideas. And you have to be intellectually curious enough to seek out that advice. And then, like I said, I'm always reading. If you'd have asked me, am I a reader or a book nerd or whatever, I would have told you no, and I'd still tell you no. But I just cannot put books down. They're just chock full of knowledge. That's why all these books are on the shelves behind me. My kids give me stacks of books for holidays. Every book I see, if I see someone on an airplane with a book on their lap, I just Google it and buy it right then and there, because I'm like, that person sitting in that first class seat, what they're reading must be valuable because somehow they landed in that seat. If you're in the back of the plane, I probably don't get your book. But most of the people in the back of the plane, no, get nothing as people like are playing Candy Crush. I don't do that because if I'm gonna do something, I'm gonna emulate those who I most want to be like. And so reading to me is a core component. I encourage my team to read, and I constantly show them that I'm reading so that if they want to follow, I set the example.
Well, now I have to know, which book would you recommend? Because I'm a voracious reader.
Well,
Same.
hey, you probably are already reading them then. People ask me that all the time, and I just read a wonderful, fabulous book, but it was more written by Elizabeth Gilbert, who's the same lady who wrote Eat, Pray, Love. She wrote a fabulous book that all the way to the river, which was amazing. She's just an amazing writer, which is in it of itself inspiring. But when I do recommend books, of course, I recommend the book. There's a book called The 5 a.m. Club, which I think is a critical book to understand why we get up at 5 a.m. Because no matter how many people I tell, including my kids, when I wake up at 5 a.m., I'm still generally the only one, even in my own household, right? So the 5 a.m. club. Steve Covey's The Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. If you could have one book and you can have seven effective habits, I think he does a good job of kind of crystallizing the message. And then, hey, the Bible, you just can't go wrong. I opened up my Bible this morning, as I do every morning. I was reading the story of Jonah and the well. And the only reason I tell you that is because I think we all know that story, you know, but until you read it directly from the source, or till you read the book that was before, which I think was the book of Amos, or any of the prophets, you don't realize how much you don't know. You just know you remember the Jonah and the well story. But there were some I read yesterday and the day before that is like new knowledge refreshing in my mind every day.
All I can say is, we have some synergies here, especially reading books. I think I'm an avid reader because of my wife. My wife is a teacher. I started watching her read books, and I just got curious after that. Now, you can't put them down after that. So I definitely understand that. I'm an old school, like most people, around our age. I like to have a book in my hand. I don't have a Kindle or whatever everybody else use. I like to have an old school book in my hand, and it's important. I tell anybody, reading is important. If you understand how you are exercising your brain because you're reading, your brain is getting old. You're working out in the gym. Your brain is working out because you're reading a lot. So it's very important. I want to segue about the power of connection in building relationships. A lot of young people don't know that building those relationships early are very important. I would love to get your perspective on why that is so important for your career.
Oh my goodness. If I would have known then, like people always say, what would you tell your 20-year-old self? The importance of relationships, and let me take a step back. I think we connected through LinkedIn. Anybody listening to this podcast, connect with me on LinkedIn, William M. Washington III, and LinkedIn has been a strategic tool for me to continue to build and expand relationships, not just with people in my natural line, people who do finance or work in law firms, but really expanding beyond that. And I found that to be an extremely valuable tool. And the number of people that send me books through LinkedIn now because they know I love books, it has been amazing. But, you know, on LinkedIn, I write a lot about being an introverted leader. And I won't go into it now because most people don't understand why I call myself an introvert or what an introvert is. But I would say, if you know me or knew me deeply, like my wife knows me, you know how much of an introvert I am. I prefer to be by myself. That's where I recharge. But I also like to work on teams. I also like to lead people. I also like relationships with people. It just has to be in a time where I'm full of energy, not depleted of energy. And so I tell you that to say that over my career, I've now established so many meaningful relationships with amazing leaders that I could have only dreamed of when I was back in those early days that I was telling you about before. And I could go on. I don't want to call them out in case they listen to this podcast as well. But when I have tough problems or tough questions about leading an organization of my size, or even just a personal career decision, my network now, my relationships now are so strong with people who have already made similar decisions in their life. And one of the reasons my relationships are so strong is because I give back. Because I give first, generally I have someone to go to because I've already sold into them or sold into their life. And so often on LinkedIn, I've told people, and I think I said it to you, reach out to me anytime. I'll do whatever, and you may learn to regret that because I get a lot of emails and messages. Oh, can you talk? Can you tell me, brother, what you did? And I tell them I still have breath in my lungs and I'll still keep making the offer until my phone's ringing so much that I can't take it anymore. And because I've sown in, people are giving back to me 10 times more than I could have ever put out there. And that's the beauty of relationships. You will not be depending on how you define success. Even Kobe Bryant, or we were talking about the president of Ukraine. All of them are doing what they do through relationships that they had to carefully manage and curate and work on and give to. And so, yeah, even as an introvert, I make time for people because people make time for me.
That's powerful. That's powerful. And I'm gonna have to do this a little early. I know we still got time, but me and Amir, every so often we have somebody on the podcast that we feel that are top of their industry. They give more than just the professional side. They want to see other people move forward, so they pay it forward. And like you do, so we have to say, and I know Amir will agree, you are a black belt in your industry. Not but we're not
Oh
talking about black
man.
belt sigma, we're talking about you are a black belt in your industry. So I would love it is an honor to say that and give you a black belt on this podcast. What you're
Oh
doing
wow.
far as in your career professionally and outside of that, you're making a difference. Your people are looking up to you to say, man, this is somebody I want to be mentored by, eventually meet in person, sponsorship, whatever that is. So it is definitely appreciated. What you're speaking on this podcast, we can hear it. We can hear how much you care. So today, you definitely have earned a black belt from us for you in your industry.
Thank you so much. Coming from a guy who was working in a mailroom, that means the world to me to even be recognized at all. And like I said, I don't think you get it back unless you give it first. And if anybody doesn't believe that's true, they can look at my life, they can look at my career, they can look at what I've done, they can look at what I've gotten. It's all started with giving, all of it.
Giving is important. Giving is important. I have to say that giving is important. I want to delve into another topic around leadership. No, there's always a difference. I would tell people that between management, you at one point you're an individual contributor, eventually you get your first team, and then you get into leadership. So what is that legacy you want to leave around leadership?
People hear when that gets said. I definitely heard it said, there's a difference between management and leadership, but I don't think they really know what it means. And there's a term called servant leadership. And I think that term is true because in order to lead, you have to be willing to serve. You have to be willing to serve others. No one wants to follow someone that they don't respect and that they don't want to be like. And so there's two things I'd say is I had to make that transition from management to leadership. It did not come just because I interviewed for a job and I got the job and now I'm the leader. I actually had to work at it. And one of the things I did was I hired a coach, an executive coach when I was at the management level. His name was Gideon Coleman of K Street Coaching. I always try to give him a shout out. And Gideon didn't look like me, he didn't act like me, but man, he knew his job. And Gideon told me some things on day one or within the first few sessions of our interview session that broke me down to my basic component, right? And if you talk to me long enough, I'll tell you more. But it humbled me. It humbled me. He did a 360. He got some feedback from my team. And the essential thing was my team said, "Oh yeah, William's great. You give William a task and he will hard charge and make sure everybody knows what it is and everybody gets it done." But that was all William cared about. If the leadership team told us we needed to do this by the end of the month, boy, I was good at like getting everybody organized, putting out the timeline, having the meetings. I would come into meetings, I'd be like, "What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing?" And that was great management. But as a leader, I come into that meeting differently. I say that the tasks are the tasks. I'll give them to you even after the meeting. But let me first hear where each of you are individually, because I need to understand where you are before we go into this battle. I need to get to know you because each of you are my trusted leaders. each of you are bringing valuable skills. But if I don't first take time to get to know you and build relationship and understand where you're at, then I'm not doing my job as a leader. And so now when I go into meetings that way, people don't come in and say, well, it was like, duh, 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 duh. They're like, for some reason, he won't start the meeting without us telling him where we're at and how we're doing and how our kids are doing and how our family's doing. Because the job's going to get done if you go into it as a team. It's kind of like those old or fighting movies, even the Marvel movies, right? Like, when they go to fight that big front line, when the music's playing and blaring and they got their big sword out, you got to be there on the front lines with them, right? And you have to be ready to go to battle. And it's just a different kind of leadership style. So what I try to say now is I try to lead with integrity and authenticity and really understanding where my people are at, because somebody might have to sit out of a particular battle because they have to tend to their kids or they have to tend to some personal issues, or it might be, understanding it's their religious holiday and which may be different than your religious holidays. So there's a lot in there, but essentially what I'd say is there was a chart that Gideon gave me. It was a circle, and he's like, "You're scoring 100, almost 100 out of 100 on all these skills." And I was like, "Yes." And he's like, "But these ones up top are the ones it takes to be a leader, and your scores are really, really low." And he said, "In order to get these up, you have to pull these down. This pie chart has to almost invert itself. So you almost have to do everything different than the way you do it today to move from management to leadership. And if you don't know what those things are, right, and you hear someone say it's different being a leader than management, then you need to learn what those things are. And for me, it took hiring to figure it out.
Man, that's similar to me and Amir had the same executive coach. That's how we met. We're in the same
Oh, wow.
community. Yeah, yeah. That's how me and Amir met based off the same executive coach. And I've told many people I did not know I needed an executive coach until I got one. And when I got
Yeah,
one, I was
yeah.
like, man, I needed an executive coach. I really need. So I definitely understand that in that difference. And I would tell anybody, even at the management level, get an executive coach. If your
Yeah.
next level you're trying to get there and you don't understand why you're not moving up, you feel like you're doing everything and you just can't move, get an executive coach. They will be able to figure out those things that you need in order to move up to the next level.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned all of those things, William, because I know that for all of us, it's a journey. And whenever I hire a people leader on my team, one of the questions I always ask them is, tell me what you think is the difference between a manager and a leader, because it very quickly gives me a sense about how well they know themselves. And that's one of the questions I ask all of my, young mentees who come and ask me questions. I always ask them, have you met yourself yet? And it's not just
Yeah.
the likes and the dislikes, but have you really met yourself? And it turns into a whole conversation from there on.
I could believe it. That could be a tough question.
Yeah. Well, start from the top, right, and then work your way down.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So William, I know we're getting close to time. So as you know, I ask everybody, what's their theme music? What gets you ready for the day? Either if it's going in the office, you getting on a plane to do go somewhere else. What is that theme music that you play to get you ready for the
Wow, that's a great, great question. And look, I know everybody has a favorite song, something they dance to, something they sing to their loved ones, but for me, anybody in my house will tell you I wake up every morning and I put on these tracks I have, and it has two people on it and they're not musicians, and one of them is Eric Thomas and the other one is David Goggins. And if you've never listened to them or their stories or how they push you, they are no nonsense guys who wake me up every morning. And, I used to put it on I put it on with all my kids, but with my youngest, and my wife would be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe, they're like, and I probably can't say it on this podcast, but they wake me up. They get me going. They get me fired up. They remind me that, I was built different. I'm born different. I'm ready. Like, getting up early is just what you got to do. If you say you want to be great, then be great, you know. And so, yeah, a little bit of Eric Thomas and David Goggins are in my headphones as I get up, drag my workout clothes on, and go to the gym, and they fire me up.
No, I
That's
can relate
perfect.
to David
That's perfect.
Goggins.
Yeah, David Goggins will fire you up.
Yeah.
If you ever listen, if no one's ever listened to David Goggins, he will make you feel like you need to go work out. The way he talks on there, you like, okay, I need to go to gym because if I'm not doing this work, that means I'm not producing the way I want to. So no, that is perfect. That is perfect, William. So we definitely have to say thank you for taking the time to join us on our podcast on Black Belts and Boardroom. It has truly been an honor. We know how busy you are, and we are so grateful that you decided to stop with us and talk for us for a while. So thank you. We appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you both for having me on. And again, for anybody listening, please check out my LinkedIn, William M. Washington the third. And I can't wait to see and hear more of what you guys produce on your podcast. Thank you for all that you guys are doing to give back.
Thank you. Thank you. So to our Black Belts and Boardrooms audience, we will see you on the next one.